The HOA president, Arthur Finch, thought arresting my 16-year-old daughter for jogging was a masterful show of power. He had no idea that less than 24 hours later, he'd be standing in my arena, a courtroom, and that I wasn't just another angry father. I was the state's senior prosecutor, the man who puts arrogant bullies like him in prison for a living. He saw my daughter as a line-item violation in his little book of rules, a disruption to his perfect, sterile order. He couldn't possibly know that with one phone call, he had just made himself the #1 target of the Public Integrity Unit, the very division I command. He was a creature of petty bylaws. I am a creature of the state and federal constitutions, and I was about to teach him the profound and painful difference between the two. The phone call came at 7:15 a.m. It was my daughter Maya, her voice small and trembling. "Dad, they arrested me." 3 words, and the quiet, ordered world I had built for my family shattered. I didn't yell. I didn't panic. My heart rate didn't even rise. Instead, a familiar, cold calm washed over me, the same professional stillness I feel when a corrupt official takes the stand and begins to lie. "Who arrested you, Maya?" I asked, my voice level. "The HOA president, Mr. Finch. He said I was trespassing." I could hear the tears she was fighting back, the humiliation. He didn't just have her stopped. He had her cuffed. Arthur Finch. 65 years old, a retired city planning commissioner who now channeled his pathological need for control into the presidency of the Oakridge Landing Homeowners Association. He was a man who lived and breathed regulations, a tyrant of beige paint swatches and lawn height requirements. His power, as far as he was concerned, was absolute. He had weaponized the community's relationship with a few local cops, turning them into his personal enforcers for his crusade against anything he deemed disorderly. And that morning, my daughter, running on a public street, wearing a hoodie on a cool morning, had become his definition of disorderly. The official charges were a masterpiece of legal fiction: loitering in a restricted residential area and failure to comply with a private security directive. Both were utterly baseless, applied to a public road. But the charges didn't matter. The humiliation was the point. The display of power was the goal. This wasn't just about a wrongful arrest. I've spent 25 years of my life fighting men like Arthur Finch. I've seen them in city halls, in police departments, in state legislatures. Men who are given a tiny taste of authority and become addicted to it, who warp rules into weapons to torment those they deem beneath them. I moved my family to this quiet neighborhood to escape the filth I deal with every day, to give my daughter a place where she could feel safe. That morning, Arthur Finch brought the swamp to my front door. He didn't just arrest a teenage girl. He targeted the daughter of the one man in the entire state whose sole professional purpose is to identify and dismantle corrupt officials who abuse their power under the color of law. He thought he was enforcing a bylaw. He had just triggered a state-level corruption investigation that would be aimed directly at his head. He wanted to teach my daughter a lesson about rules. By the time I was finished, I was going to teach him a lesson about consequences. The kind that don't come with a warning letter or a flimsy fine. The kind that come with a grand jury indictment, a public trial, and the cold, hard reality of a prison cell. He thought he was a king in his little kingdom of manicured lawns. He was about to find out he was nothing more than a defendant in my courtroom. What's the worst abuse of power you've ever seen from an HOA? Let me know in the comments. Because this story isn't just about a power-tripping president. It's about the absolute obliteration of his entire world, and it all started the very next morning. After the line went dead, I didn't move for a full minute. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, and I let the rage come. It wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold. It was the crystalline, diamond-hard fury of a man whose life's work is holding the powerful accountable, who now found that the very filth he fought downtown had seeped into his own quiet suburb and laid its hands on his child. In my mind, a case file had just been opened. The defendant, Arthur Finch. The charge, catastrophic stupidity, and I, Mark Voss, would be the prosecutor. There would be no plea bargain. There would be no mercy. I had spent my entire career putting men like him behind bars, and he had just, in his infinite arrogance, made himself my most important case. For 25 years, I've worked in the state prosecutor's office. I didn't stay in traffic court or chase low-level dealers. I went straight for the rot. For the last decade, I have served as the chief of the Public Integrity Unit, a division most people don't even know exists. We are a surgical team. We don't handle street crime. We hunt the powerful. We investigate, prosecute, and dismantle corrupt politicians, dirty cops, and crooked judges. In the courthouse, they call me the Scalpel for my reputation of clinically taking apart complex criminal enterprises, of finding the one thread that, when pulled, unravels the entire rotten tapestry. I was the man who indicted Mayor Jennings on bribery charges using his own encrypted emails against him. I was the one who exposed the Sheriff's Department kickback scheme, sending a half-dozen decorated officers to federal prison. My entire professional life is a testament to one simple, brutal truth. The higher you are, the harder you fall. And I am the man who engineers the fall. I chose this neighborhood for a reason. I chose this quiet, unassuming house on this tree-lined street as a deliberate act of separation. My work requires me to swim in a sewer of greed, cynicism, and human weakness every single day. I've seen the absolute worst of what people in power are willing to do to others. I wanted my daughter, Maya, to grow up in a place completely removed from that world. I wanted her to believe in good neighbors and safe streets. I wanted her sanctuary to be absolute. In my professional life, I am a weapon of the state. But at home, I was just a dad who grilled burgers on the weekend and helped with homework. I never talked about my cases, and my neighbors just knew me as the quiet lawyer who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. That firewall was my most sacred creation, and Arthur Finch had just taken a sledgehammer to it. He had brought the world I fight into the one place I considered safe. He hadn't just made it personal, he had made it my professional duty to eradicate him and the corrupt system he represented. Across the street, my neighbor Sarah was getting into her car when she saw the police cruiser pull away from the park entrance with Maya in the back. Sarah is one of the best defense attorneys in the state. We've faced each other in court a half-dozen times. She knows exactly who I am and what I do. As she later told me, her blood ran cold. She went back inside and called her husband. "You are not going to believe what I just saw," she said, her voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "Arthur Finch, that tin pot dictator from the HOA, just had Mark Voss's daughter arrested for jogging." Her husband was silent for a moment. "Wait," he said. "Our Mark Voss?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "That Mark Voss. Finch is a dead man walking, and he doesn't even know it. He didn't just break a rule. He just declared war on the one man in this entire state who has never, ever lost. This isn't going to be a lawsuit. It's going to be a bloodbath." Sarah was right. Finch had no idea who he had provoked. He had poked a bear, assuming it was a tame old dog. But before a prosecutor dismantles a criminal enterprise, he must first understand its structure. A good commander never attacks without perfect intelligence. My initial rage had already cooled, replaced by the methodical focus that had won me every major case of my career. I needed to know everything about Arthur Finch and his petty kingdom. Every corrupt contract, every abused bylaw, every intimidated resident who was too scared to speak up. I needed a complete map of the battlefield. The righteous fury of a father was the fuel, but the cold, calculating mind of a prosecutor would steer the weapon. My investigation into Arthur Finch and the Oakridge Landing Homeowners Association began that night, and I would not rest until I had every piece of evidence I needed to burn his world to the ground. Every corrupt organization has a predictable structure, whether it's a global cartel or a suburban homeowners association. There's the figurehead, the enforcers, and the complicit authorities who look the other way. As I spent that evening digging into the history of the Oakridge Landing HOA, the pattern was as clear and as ugly as a crime scene photograph. Arthur Finch wasn't just a president. He was the architect of a micro-dictatorship, and he had built his throne on two pillars: outsourced intimidation and institutional bribery. He had created a system designed to crush dissent and enforce his will, and he had become so comfortable in it, he never imagined it could be turned against him. I've dismantled mayors' offices and police departments built on the exact same blueprint. Finch's little HOA was just a scaled-down model of the same disease. His muscle was a private security firm called Oak Shield Security. On paper, their contract was for simple neighborhood patrols. In practice, they were Finch's personal goon squad, paid for with the residents' own money. I pulled their file. They were a low-rent operation with a history of excessive force complaints. For a hefty fee, they provided Finch with exactly what he craved: the illusion of a police force he could command. Their guards, dressed in black, tactical-style uniforms, were a constant, menacing presence. They didn't just patrol, they documented. They followed residents on walks, filmed children playing in their own yards, and issued official-looking citations for violations as absurd as leaving a garbage can out for an hour too long. These citations had no legal weight, but they were a tool of psychological warfare, designed to make people feel constantly watched, judged, and one infraction away from real trouble. Finch had outsourced his harassment, creating a buffer between himself and his victims, while enjoying the fruits of their fear. The second pillar was his relationship with a handful of officers at the local police precinct. Finch was the largest private donor to the Police Benevolent Fund, a classic tactic of soft bribery hiding in plain sight. I've seen it 100 times. A corrupt official uses a slush fund, or in this case, an HOA's treasury, to shower a department with gifts and donations. In return, when that official calls, a few specific, complicit officers respond with a speed and credulity they don't afford to regular citizens. The arresting officer in my daughter's case, I soon discovered, was a regular beneficiary of Finch's generosity, having attended multiple police charity galas on the HOA's dime. This was the quid pro quo. Finch got a loyal, on-call enforcer with a badge and a gun, and the officer got a friendly relationship with a wealthy, supportive community. Finch wasn't just calling the cops. He was calling his cops. The true cruelty of this system was best exemplified by what he'd done to my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a decorated Marine veteran in his late 70s. Mr. Henderson flew a Marine Corps flag on a small pole next to his front door. It had been there for 20 years. Last spring, Finch decided the flag was a non-sanctioned display and a violation of a newly minted bylaw. When Henderson politely refused to take it down, Finch unleashed his entire machine. First came the daily citations from Oak Shield Security, left on his doorstep like threats. Then came the phone calls, with Finch personally berating him for his lack of community spirit. Finally came the police. Finch called in repeated wellness checks on Mr. Henderson, implying the old man was senile and confused. The stress of the constant harassment, of seeing police cars and security guards outside his home every day, became too much. Mr. Henderson suffered a massive anxiety attack and was hospitalized for 3 days. When he came back, the flag was gone. Finch had won. He hadn't just enforced a rule, he had enjoyed the process of breaking a good man's spirit. My daughter's arrest was not an isolated incident. It was the logical and arrogant climax of Finch's reign. In his perfectly ordered world, a teenager jogging in a hoodie was an anomaly, a variable he couldn't control, and therefore, a threat. She didn't fit his narrow, sterile vision of the community, so she had to be disciplined, made an example of. He saw her, and he saw his chance to demonstrate the full, unchecked extent of his power, to show everyone that his authority, enforced by his private guards and his pet cops, was absolute. He felt untouchable. And that was the fatal miscalculation that would lead to his ruin. In his supreme arrogance, Finch had made a critical scheduling error. As I was piecing together his pattern of abuse, I got a text from my neighbor, Sarah. "Mark, you need to know. Finch is on the court docket for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. He's personally suing Henderson over the flag." The irony was so profound, it was almost beautiful. The very next day, the man who had my daughter arrested was voluntarily walking into the one building on Earth where I was not just a resident, but a predator at the top of the food chain. He was so consumed with his petty crusade against an old man's flag that he was about to walk, blind and stupid, into my house. He thought he was entering that courthouse as the plaintiff, the one in control. He had no idea he was about to become the prime suspect in a brand new and far more serious investigation. The moment I hung up with Sarah, the gears shifted. The righteous fury of a father receded, replaced by the cold, methodical precision of a prosecutor building a case. My home office, usually a quiet sanctuary for reading case law and decompressing from the moral filth of my day job, transformed into an operational command center. Arthur Finch was going to court in the morning. He thought his opponent was an elderly veteran. He had no idea his true adversary was already moving, activating a network he couldn't possibly comprehend, preparing an ambush from which there would be no escape. While he slept, dreaming his petty dreams of absolute control, I went to work. A proper prosecution isn't built on emotion. It's built on a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the merciless application of the law. My first call was to Davis, my lead investigator. He's a bulldog, a retired homicide detective who can smell a lie from 100 yards away. I woke him up. I didn't care. "Davis," I said, my voice low and flat. "I have a priority one situation, an illegal detainment. The victim is my daughter. I gave him the address and the approximate time. The orders were precise. I need the full incident report from the precinct. I want the complete service jacket on the arresting officer, every complaint, every commendation, every mark on his record. And most importantly, I want the body cam footage from the arrest. I don't want a copy. I want the certified, raw, digital file, chain of custody fully documented. I need it on my secure server before midnight." There was no hesitation on his end. He just said, "Consider it done, boss." He knew my tone. He knew this wasn't just a case. It was a crusade. My second call was to a deputy at the Secretary of State's office, a man who owed me a favor after my unit uncovered the election fraud that would have cost him his job. "Michael," I said, "I need corporate filings. 2 entities, the Oakridge Landing Homeowners Association and a private security firm called Oakshield Security. I needed their articles of incorporation, their list of board members, their current insurance carriers, and any contracts filed with the state." A prosecutor knows that the bylaws and HOA shows its residents are often just for show. The real vulnerabilities, the real pressure points, are in the corporate charter they file with the state. I was looking for one clause in particular, the one that outlined the personal liability of board members in the event of criminal negligence. I knew it would be there. It always is. These little tyrants never think the rules will apply to them. With the evidence gathering in motion, I sat at my desk and mapped out the legal framework of the attack. What Finch and his pet police officer had done wasn't just a mistake or an overreach. It was a textbook violation of federal law. Specifically, 42 U.S. Code Section 1983, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. I wrote the statute number down on a fresh legal pad. It's a beautiful piece of law, elegant and brutal. It makes it a federal offense for any person acting with the authority of the state to deprive a citizen of their constitutional rights. The officer, a state actor, had arrested my daughter without probable cause. But the real poison in the statute, the part that was about to end Arthur Finch's world, is the conspiracy component. When a private citizen, like an HOA president, conspires with a state actor to commit that deprivation, the private citizen is also held liable under federal law. Finch hadn't just called a cop. He had entered into a criminal conspiracy with him. He had crossed a line from being a civic nuisance to being a federal defendant. He thought he was operating under his little HOA charter. He had no idea he was now under the jurisdiction of the United States Department of Justice. By 11 p.m., the files started arriving on my encrypted server. First, the police report. It was a joke, a flimsy narrative clearly dictated by Finch, full of subjective language like suspicious individual and defiant attitude. The arresting officer hadn't even bothered to make it look legitimate. Then came the body cam footage. I hit play, and my blood ran cold. I watched the entire encounter through the officer's eyes. I saw my daughter, illuminated in the flashing red and blue lights, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. I heard her voice, trembling but firm, asserting her right to be on a public street. And I saw him, Arthur Finch, standing in the background, arms crossed, orchestrating the entire violation with a smug, satisfied look on his face. He was the director of his own little horror film. It was the most damning piece of evidence I had ever seen. It was a signed confession on video. I spent the next 3 hours dissecting every frame of that video, cross-referencing every statement with the lies in the police report, and building the legal argument, piece by irrefutable piece. The corporate filings came in just after 2 a.m. And there it was, in the HOA Charter, Article 11, Section 2. Board members may be held personally and financially liable for any actions taken that are determined to be criminally negligent or in willful violation of state or federal law. It was the kill switch. By 3 a.m., the case was built. It was an ironclad, multi-layered trap of state and federal law. Finch thought he was going to court in the morning to argue about a flag. He had no idea he was walking into his own indictment, where I would be both the witness for the prosecution and the architect of his demise. The sun wasn't even up, but his world was already set to burn. All I had to do was strike the first match. The next morning, I didn't go to my office. I went to the county courthouse. This was my home turf. The air, thick with the smell of old paper, floor wax, and anxious coffee, was the air I had breathed for 25 years. The bailiffs at the security checkpoint, men I'd known for decades, gave me respectful nods. Morning, Chief. The clerks behind the bulletproof glass looked up and smiled. I wasn't a visitor here. I was a part of the building's ecosystem, a predator moving through familiar territory. I saw him holding court in the hallway before his case was called. Arthur Finch, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, pontificating to his lawyer and a few board members who'd come to watch him perform. He looked serene, confident, a man utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He was a king in his own mind, about to preside over the trial of an old man's flag, completely oblivious to the fact that a far more serious judgment was about to be rendered upon him. I took a seat in the back of the small, drab courtroom and watched the proceedings. It was a pathetic spectacle. Finch took the stand, his voice dripping with sanctimonious concern for the integrity and standards of our community. He spoke of bylaws and aesthetic harmony. He painted Mr. Henderson's simple Marine Corps flag as a defiant act of rebellion that threatened the very fabric of their neighborhood. I watched him lie under oath, exaggerating the timeline, misrepresenting the bylaws, and feigning a deep personal wound over a piece of colored fabric. His lawyer, a smarmy, overpriced suit named Peterson, guided him through the testimony with practiced ease. They were a well-oiled machine of petty persecution. I watched Mr. Henderson, a man who had faced enemy fire in defense of this country, sit there and be lectured about patriotism by this glorified hall monitor. The arrogance was breathtaking. The judge, looking bored, called for a 15-minute recess. This was the moment. The ambush was set. Finch, his lawyer, and his sycophants strode out into the hallway, flushed with the certainty of their impending victory. I followed. I saw Mr. Henderson standing by a window, looking tired and defeated. I positioned myself so he would have a clear view of what was about to happen. I let them have a moment to bask in their self-congratulation. And then I approached. "Mr. Finch," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their chatter like a razor. Finch turned, an annoyed expression on his face, expecting another resident to complain to. "Yes?" I looked past him and met the eyes of his lawyer. "I'm Mark Voss. You had my daughter Maya arrested yesterday." The change in the lawyer, Peterson, was immediate and seismic. The smug smile vanished from his face, replaced by a ghastly, waxy pallor. His eyes widened in dawning horror. I could see the gears turning in his head, the name Mark Voss connecting with the title Chief, Public Integrity Unit. He knew exactly who I was. He looked at Finch, then back at me, and I could see raw, animal panic in his eyes. He had just realized he was standing next to a man who had unknowingly picked a fight with a lion. Finch, cocooned in his own ignorance, was merely annoyed. "That was a simple matter of enforcing community standards," he said dismissively. "If you have a complaint, you can file it with the board." "There will be no need for that," I said, keeping my gaze locked on the terrified lawyer. "Let's review the facts, Mr. Peterson, since you are an officer of the court. Yesterday, your client, a private citizen, conspired with a police officer, a state actor, to unlawfully detain a minor without a shred of probable cause. He did so based on a report he knew to be false. He then directed this state actor to make an arrest. I took a step closer. As I'm sure you know, that is a textbook conspiracy to commit a federal civil rights violation under 42 U.S. Code Section 1983. That's before we even get to the state charges of false imprisonment and filing a false police report." Peterson was visibly trembling now, trying to discreetly pull Finch by the elbow. Finch, enraged by my tone, shook him off. "And who the hell are you to lecture me about the law?" he snarled. That was the line I had been waiting for. I turned my full attention from the lawyer to Finch, letting him feel the full, undivided weight of my focus for the first time. My voice dropped, losing all pretense of civility, becoming the cold, hard instrument of the state. "I'm the man who is opening a criminal investigation into you, your HOA, and Oakshield Security as of 9 a.m. this morning," I said. "I'm the chief of the Public Integrity Unit for the state of New York. And you just made yourself and your entire corrupt little organization my #1 priority case." The color drained from Arthur Finch's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer for help, but Peterson was already backing away, whispering, "Oh my God," over and over again. I saw Mr. Henderson across the hall, his jaw hanging open, a slow, beautiful smile of pure, unadulterated joy spreading across his face. A court reporter, who had been passing by, had stopped dead in her tracks, and was now scribbling furiously into her notepad. I didn't linger to savor the moment. My point had been made. I pulled out my phone, turned my back on the smoldering wreckage of Arthur Finch's world, and dialed my lead investigator. "Davis? It's Voss." "Where a go?" I paused, looking out the courthouse window, my voice dropping to a final, irrevocable command. "Get the subpoenas ready for the Oakridge HOA, all of them." I hung up and walked away without a backward glance, the sounds of Finch's world collapsing behind me. The call to Davis was not a request, it was an activation order. Before the courthouse had even closed for the day, the first wave of the assault was already in motion. This wasn't going to be a protracted legal battle of motions and counter-motions. This was going to be a shock and awe campaign designed to utterly paralyze the enemy's ability to fight back. My unit doesn't engage in wars of attrition. We execute decapitation strikes. By the time Arthur Finch got home that afternoon, still reeling from our confrontation, 2 of my best investigators were already waiting for him on his doorstep. They weren't there to ask questions. They were there to serve him with a subpoena ducis tecum, a court order demanding every piece of correspondence, every financial record, and every electronic device related to his position as HOA president. Simultaneously, another team was at the HOA's management office, seizing their servers. We weren't asking for their cooperation. We were legally stripping them of every piece of incriminating evidence they possessed before they had a chance to delete it. The message was clear and brutal. This is not a civil dispute. This is a criminal investigation, and you are now a target of the state. Next, we neutralized his enforcers. The police officer who had arrested my daughter, the one who had acted as Finch's loyal foot soldier, was met by 2 senior detectives from Internal Affairs as he came off his shift. In the precinct locker room, in front of his colleagues, he was served with a notice of investigation, stripped of his badge and service weapon, and placed on immediate administrative leave. The blue wall of silence is thick, but it cracks under the pressure of the Public Integrity Unit. The word spreads like fire through a department when one of their own is being investigated by my office. It signals that the normal rules of professional courtesy are suspended. That officer was now an island, cut off from the very institution he had disgraced. At the same time, a formal complaint from my office was filed with the State Licensing Board against Oakshield Security. The complaint triggered an immediate top-to-bottom audit of their contracts, their hiring practices, and every single incident report they had ever filed on behalf of the Oakridge HOA. Their business model, which relied on harassing residents for profit, was now under a state-level microscope. We hadn't just taken out Finch's pawns, we had put them in their own legal jeopardy, forcing them to focus on their own survival. The most sophisticated strike, however, was aimed at the heart of the organization, its money and its legal shield. Chen, my lawyer, drafted a certified letter to the HOA's Directors and Officers Insurance Carrier. The letter was a dry, clinical masterpiece. It formally notified them that the president and multiple board members of their insured entity, the Oakridge Landing HOA, were now official subjects in an ongoing state criminal investigation and would be named as defendants in a forthcoming federal civil rights lawsuit. An insurance policy is a contract, and every contract has an exclusion clause. I knew theirs would have one for damages arising from deliberate criminal acts. The effect was instantaneous and exactly as I had predicted. The carrier's legal team immediately issued a reservation of rights letter to the entire board. In the cold, emotionless language of insurance law, it informed them that the company would provide a defense, but it reserved the right to deny any and all coverage for a final judgment. It was a declaration that if they were found guilty of the things I was accusing them of, they were on their own. The multi-million-dollar insurance policy they thought protected them had just evaporated. The panic that ripped through the HOA board was glorious. These were people who had felt untouchable just 48 hours earlier, safely insulated by their insurance policy and Finch's bravado. Now, they were facing the prospect of personal bankruptcy. They held an emergency meeting that night, a frantic, screaming affair from which Finch himself was excluded. They weren't discussing how to fight me. They were discussing how to save themselves from him. They each called their own personal attorneys, and every single one of them gave the same terrified advice. You need to distance yourself from Arthur Finch. You need to cooperate. You need to get out now. The unified front had shattered. The corrupt king was now staring down a palace coup, his own loyal court sharpening their knives, ready to sacrifice him to save themselves. The final, fatal blow didn't come from my office. It came from within theirs. Late that night, my late investigator Davis got a call on his private cell. It was the HOA's treasurer, a nervous accountant who, faced with the prospect of losing his license and his life savings, had decided to cut a deal. He was terrified. He wanted full immunity. In exchange, he offered us everything. A secret ledger Finch kept of the donations to the police fund. Copies of emails in which Finch explicitly instructed the board to use HOA money to pay for his personal legal vendetta against Mr. Henderson. He had the receipts. He had the timelines. He had the proof of a criminal conspiracy, and he was willing to testify to it all in front of a grand jury. Davis called me at 2 a.m. "We've got him, boss," he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "We've got a cooperating witness. The whole damn thing is coming down." Finch thought he was the king of a loyal court. He was about to learn that in the face of a real prosecution, there is no loyalty. There is only self-preservation. And his star witness had just walked into my office. With a cooperating witness from inside the conspiracy, the endgame was swift and brutal. I convened a grand jury. My team and I presented the case over 2 days, laying out the entire sordid enterprise in meticulous detail. The financial records from our new witness, the damning body cam footage of my daughter's arrest, the testimony from Mr. Henderson, and the clear, undeniable pattern of intimidation and fraud. The jury was out for less than an hour. They came back with a true bill, a unanimous vote to indict Arthur Finch on multiple felony counts, including conspiracy to deprive a citizen of their rights and filing a false police report. The legal machine he had tried to weaponize had now turned on him with its full crushing force. The arresting officer, faced with the prospect of being a co-defendant in a federal case, resigned from the force the same day. The rest of the HOA board, realizing that the treasurer's deal was the only one on the table, resigned en masse in a flurry of panicked emails. The Oakridge Landing HOA, once a tyrannical little kingdom, had been rendered headless and powerless. Finch's public humiliation was not a dramatic, headline-grabbing affair. It was quiet, pathetic, and perfectly fitting. There was no pre-dawn raid. I simply had Davis, my lead investigator, serve him the indictment papers at his home the next morning. He was on his front lawn, meticulously picking a non-existent weed from his perfect flower bed, when Davis's unmarked car pulled up. He was served the thick packet of legal documents in front of his neighbors, the very people he had once terrorized. The look on his face, a mixture of disbelief, horror, and impotent rage, was more satisfying than any courtroom verdict. A week later, a "for sale" sign was hammered into his lawn. He was liquidating his assets to pay for the criminal defense attorneys who would ultimately fail him. His reign had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, desperate whimper of a man forced to sell his castle to pay for his crimes. With their tormentor gone, the community began to heal. The first act of rebellion was small, but beautiful. Mr. Henderson walked out onto his porch and once again raised the Marine Corps flag up his flagpole. This time, however, something was different. Within an hour, another flag went up at the house next to him. Then another across the street. By noon, the entire street was a riot of American flags, service flags, and state flags. A silent, powerful salute to the old man who had refused to break, and a collective act of defiance against the sterile conformity that had been forced upon them for so long. The oppressive atmosphere that had choked the neighborhood for years had finally lifted. 2 weeks later, at a community meeting led by Mr. Henderson and my neighbor Sarah, the residents voted, with a staggering 95% majority, to formally dissolve the HOA charter. It was over. They were free. My daughter started running again the next day. I watched from the kitchen window as she took off down the street, not with the tense, guarded posture she'd had before, but with a free, confident stride. Her face, which had been tight with anxiety, was relaxed, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She wasn't just jogging, she was reclaiming her territory, her peace, her freedom. In that moment, the two halves of my life, the professional and the personal, finally merged. I had spent a career fighting to protect the public from corrupt men like Arthur Finch. This time, the public was my daughter. The community was my own. I had not just won a case, I had done my duty as a father, using the skills I had honed over a lifetime to protect my own family and restore justice to my own home. But the file on Arthur Finch was not the end. It was a beginning. The evidence our cooperating witness provided, particularly the contracts and secret payment ledgers for Oakshield security, had revealed something far more sinister than a single power-hungry HOA president. Finch was just one client in a much larger, more dangerous enterprise. Oakshield wasn't just a security firm. It was a pay-to-play harassment service for wealthy enclaves across the state, a private army for the rich, operating in a dark, gray area of the law. Finch was just a single, rotten branch. But his case had led us directly to the root of the tree. And my job, the job I live for, is to poison the root. Next time, I'll tell you how we took down the entire Oakshield conspiracy.